All right, so we are all lovers of liberty here, right? Are we not? And as lovers of liberty, we love talking about conclusions. We love it. It's so wonderful to say, free markets are beautiful, globalization is just wonderful. Free trade really increases wealth. It makes poor people richer and rich people even richer. It's beautiful. We love saying an armed society is a polite society. Let me show you this picture of this beautiful woman exercising her Second Amendment rights by holding a nice AR-15. We love talking about the conclusions of liberty because that's what's sexy. The woman holding an AR-15 while also holding the Second Amendment in her other hand and being half naked. That is sexy. That's a conclusion, though. That's a conclusion. How did we get to that point? So this would be like a Lord of the Rings fanboy talking to his buddy and saying, there's this great trilogy out there. It's got magic, it's got adventures, it's got wizards, it's got a ring, it's got a really creepy guy who's half naked, who scrounges around on the ground. You're gonna love this trilogy. And his buddy goes, yeah, show me the trilogy. I wanna see it. And then what you end up doing is you take out Return of the King, the third volume, and you put it towards the end, the very end of the entire trilogy, and you get to see Frodo fail the final test and not actually throw the ring into the lake of doom, and then Gollum comes over and chews his finger off, and you show this final scene, and this guy's sitting there wondering, why is this creepy character a cannibal, and what is going on with this ring, and what's with all the lava, and why is there this magic wizard, what's going on? Or, if I may, for our older audience, it'd be like showing the very end of Casablanca, and Humphrey Bogart says, we'll always have Paris. Here's looking at you, kid. And then Laszlo and Ilsa fly away in the plane. You know, you don't start at the end. But the end is what's really engaging and really sexy to talk about. Oh, here's looking at you, kid. We'll always have Paris. So what I want to do is I want to rewind the film. Let's get away from the sexy for today. Let's rewind the film back to the start when Frodo and Samwise Gamgee are still in the Shire and Bilbo Baggins is having his birthday party. Remember that first scene in the first movie? Let's start there. So what am I getting at? I want to talk about the beginning of the story. I want to talk about first principles, which I want to have all of us agree should form the foundation of our philosophy of freedom. And there's a lot of different methods to try to get to first principles. And the way I'm going to describe my favorite method is, I guess you can call it axiomatic, in the vein of the Austrian economists, in the vein of Ludwig von Mises. And there's other ways to do it. I know objectivists hate when I give this presentation because they have a different method. But I'm gonna walk you through my method of establishing the first principles of liberty, which I believe must conform to the two I's. The first principle must be irreducible and it must be irrefutable. And so when I say first principle, I mean it is the first stepping stone in your series. It has no assumptions built in. It's beautiful to talk about the Second Amendment and rights and freedom of speech and free markets and trade and prosperity, but all of those thoughts and all of those arguments and beautiful thoughts are all conclusions based on something. So how did you get there? And so I want to give you a building block foundation with irreducible and irrefutable principles that leads us to what I believe is the granddaddy principle of them all. It's what our entire philosophy of freedom is based on: property rights. If you can have a coherent philosophy where you can prove, so to speak, that property rights are valid, that people can validly own property, well then that's everything, right? That's what Murray Rothbard believed. He said every right that we can imagine, it all fundamentally comes down to property rights. Mises said, and I might butcher this quote, but he said, classical liberalism, in one word, is property. It all comes down to property. So if we can put forth a foundation for proving property rights, well then half the battle's won. Then we could sexify the conclusions all day long. Show the picture of the girl holding the gun, talk about you know, armed society is a polite society, talk about free trade. It's beautiful. So, where do we start? Well, I'm going to start in the vein of Descartes and simply propose that our first stepping stone, our first block, our first principle should be, I exist. And this is taken from Descartes' Meditations, if you've ever read that. It's a real gripping tale. It actually is, I'm being somewhat facetious. In that one you get the whole I think, therefore I am. So I don't think you can go any deeper. You can't really dig any deeper than I exist. So let's start there. I exist. Now, if somebody, and I said this is the first I, irreducible. I exist. It's irreducible. There's no assumptions built in. And the second I is irrefutable. So what if somebody says, well, I don't believe that I exist? Well, how can you say that? If you say that you don't exist, doesn't that prove your existence? It's kind of contradictory to say, I don't exist. So I believe that existence is an irrefutable axiom because if you try to argue that you do not exist, you are validating that you do exist. Otherwise, you couldn't make that argument. So let's start there. Second stepping stone, I control my body. I am in control of my body. Now, this one is, I like to think of this one as in the vein of Mises's first stepping stone in his economic philosophy, humans act, and you'll get this if you read Human Action. But if somebody tries to refute that they control their body, they have to control their body to say that they don't control their body. So this is Mises's first principle in human action is humans act. So in order to refute that humans act, you have to act. So it's also of the irrefutable vein. So I exist, I control my body, which I think if you try to argue against I control my body, you are performing a contradiction. And the third step, which is a little more fun to work with, because I'm going to ask a volunteer to come up here in a bit. The third one is, I am responsible for the effects of my actions. I am responsible for the effects of my body. Now, if I were to create, if I were to use my body to create something, like a work of art, a pillow, a movie, something like that, well then, I think we all agree that that is an effect of my body. That pillow that I created is an effect of my body. Therefore, I am responsible for that pillow. I control that pillow, like I control my body. If I use my body to commit a murder, then I am responsible for that murder. So imagine going to a judge at your murder trial and saying, well, I agree that I exist. I agree that I control my body. But I do not agree that I have responsibility over the effects of my body. So I fully admit and accept that I use my hand to grab the gun. I use my hand, controlled my hand to point the gun and pulled the trigger. But what happened after that? That's not my fault. How do you think that defense would fly? So let's take another corollary. Let's look at this from a different angle, because this is the hardest step in the little syllogism that I'm presenting. Remember the movie The Exorcist? And remember when the poor little girl gets the demon inside of her and she's doing terrible things in her room with the priest present, and she's clearly, you know, vomiting up green stuff and all this crazy stuff. All right, she's clearly not in control of her body. Imagine her mom came into the room while the demon-possessed girl is going crazy, and says, "You know what? You are acting out of control, and in my house we do not vomit green fluid, and I am very angry at you, daughter, and so therefore when you're done being out of control, you are grounded for a month." Does that make any sense? No, it doesn't. Because while she was demon-possessed, she was not in control of her body. Therefore, we relinquish her ability to be responsible for her actions. But if she were acting like a crazy person and she were in control of her body, and she was not demon-possessed, we would say, yes, it is valid that you might be grounded for being a crazy person. So, I want to bring up my volunteer now to illustrate this point one more time. McCain? Where's McCain?
He's upstairs doing check-in.
Oh, well, okay. All right, well this is going to be even better, because now my volunteer is going to be Kyle. Kyle, no, I don't know you that well. I know Kyle pretty well. Kyle, come up here. This is going to be even better because Kyle doesn't know what I'm about to do. All right, so Kyle is going to say, Justin, I exist, I control my body, but I am not responsible for the effects of my actions. I am not responsible for my body. Well, Kyle, tell me that you are not responsible for the effects of your actions.
I'm not responsible for my actions.
Can Kyle get mad at me if he tells me I am not responsible for the effects of my actions? Thanks for doing that. I actually told McCain I want to hit you in the face, so he knew it was coming. And I told him to act really dramatic about it. So if Kyle says, I don't agree that I am responsible for the effects of my actions, well, I'm just going to hit him. And I'm going to hit him and hit him and hit him until he gets it. Because he can't get mad at me if he doesn't believe that he is responsible for the effects of his actions, because clearly I'm not responsible for the effects of my actions. I can hit him all day long and that's fine, right? We're all not responsible for the effects of our actions. So there's a few different ways that you can look at this particular step in the puzzle. There's the bizarre murder defense, the exorcism thing, hitting somebody. But what I'm trying to do is validate the fact that when we use our bodies and our minds, and we're in control of our bodies and our minds, what we do with our bodies and our minds, we are responsible for, good and bad. So when we create something like a business, we create something like a shed, a movie with a girl throwing up green vomit, we are responsible for that. And this, I believe, is the fundamental validation for owning property. Now, if we can get to the point where we say, when I use my body to create something like a pillow, I am in control of that pillow now. I am the owner of that pillow. Well then, can I go up to Kyle, who has just created a pillow, and take it? I don't believe I can, because I'll get into this a little later on. I'd be performing a contradiction if I took Kyle's pillow. But as the owner of Kyle's pillow, he can decide that he wants to give the pillow to me. He's fully capable, and it's fully valid for him to do something with that pillow, burn it, give it to me, trade it for something. So I think it's pretty easy, if we accept that we're responsible for the effects of our actions, to get to the point of, I can do things with the things I create. I can burn them, I can give them away, I can trade them. So we can validate trade and charity pretty easily. So, what first principles does is it provides a solid foundation for forming your philosophy of freedom, and it gives you something to go back to every time you need to decide whether a public policy is good or bad. And there's another way to analyze public policies and other philosophies, and that is a very popular method, and I'm very much against it. And it's arguments from effect, or consequentialism. Now, you look at a public policy based on the effects that it will have and whether it's good or bad. And there's something fundamentally, I guess, uneasy about this approach, is that you have to sit there and consider all of the unforeseen future effects that something might have, and all the unforeseen future incentives that that thing might create. So instead of going back to the beginning and trying to figure out whether policy X or Y is valid, is consistent, is logical, is rational, what you're doing is you're saying, well, if we implement policy X, are the effects good, and do I like the effects, generally is what people do. So for example, you'll hear, well, seatbelt laws are good because it will save lives. Or subsidizing green energy, solar and wind, is good because it'll save the environment. Every time you hear that because clause, you know that somebody is analyzing an idea, a philosophy, a public policy based on what they think the effects might be, and then liking those effects, rather than going back to the beginning and saying, well, who owns that car and seatbelt that you want to control? Where did you get the money to give to Solyndra to save the environment? Where did you get that money from? So I'm proposing the approach from going to the start, going back to step one, rather than trying to ex post rationalize something on the back end. Because I think you run into too many problems when you're trying to analyze effects of something that hasn't even existed yet. Or analyzing the effects of something that does exist, because Bastiat says it's easy to see the seen, it is very difficult to see the unseen. So I am not a fan whatsoever of arguments from effect or consequentialism. What I am proposing again is that we build the foundation and then we continue to go back to the beginning of that foundation and evaluate philosophies and ideas and public policies based on that strong foundation that we've built. So when I said that the argument from effect for subsidizing renewable energy is a failure, first principles would say, like I mentioned earlier, where did you get the money to give to the solar plant? Now, this brings into light the inherent contradiction that taking money or taking property from somebody, theft, if you will, is a contradiction. It is a contradiction. Why is that a contradiction? Well, philosophy in first principle says it's a contradiction because you are invalidating property ownership and then immediately validating property ownership in the next breath. So taking something from Daniel, if I take Daniel's wallet, take his money, take his watch, I am saying that property ownership is invalid. I do not recognize this as a valid, as a rational, logical, valid proposition and principle. So I'm going to take your money, and then what am I going to do with this money? Well, now it's my money. All of a sudden, out of the blue, property ownership is all of a sudden valid. Isn't that wonderful? So you have a performative contradiction where you are invalidating property ownership and at the same time validating it in the next step. That just does not work. That is, as they say in the world of philosophy, a giant fail. So I wanted to go through maybe one real-world example Let's what's hot these days in public policy that we should attack from the back end rather than the sexy end?
CISPA.
Birth control.
Birth control. Oh my god. Yeah. Can you really talk about birth control without being sexy? That may be difficult.
How about fracking?
Fracking. So what's the debate on fracking? What are the sides on fracking?
Well, the negatives are that it's ruining the environment, and it's not good for the health. But on the other side, on the good side, it creates jobs.
Okay. That I do not like. So he says fracking, the debate over fracking is, one side says that fracking is bad because it hurts the environment. It's bad because it poisons our water or makes our water flammable or something like that. And he says that's bogus because it creates jobs. So I think that's looking at it from the wrong direction. So how would we look at the issue of fracking, which it's a little specific, but how would we look at the issue of fracking from not the back end because again, I mean that you're getting into murky territory. You try to do a little because. How do you look at it from the foundation?
It disturbs other people's property.
It disturbs other people's property. We're getting. I like the sound of that. We can work on that.
It's my well.
It's my well. Ooh, there we go. It's my well. Do you control my well?
I control my well.
All right. Well then, I like that one even better. You went. So you started at the very end. You started at the. We'll always have Paris. Here's looking at you, kid. She took it back to of all the gambling, of all the gin joints in all the world, she had to walk into mine. So she took it back a little further. You got it from the first scene, which I can't recall. I love this movie too. Anyway, we'll stop with that analogy. But I like that one. That was and we got one more thought.
There's a potential for damaging other people's properties.
There's a potential for damaging other people's property. So.
Right.
You're imposing risk on other people.
And as long as it is my well, I also have the responsibility of my actions or my property so that it doesn't disturb anybody else's
Right.
inherent rights.
If you can recognize his property right in the well, you fundamentally recognize his responsibility over that well and the effects of that well. So those effects might be good, i.e. pumping out delicious drinking water, or the effects of his well might be evil, meaning it may pollute your side of the property, it may pollute a stream, and so you can't say that, you can't call it your well, and then at the same time say, well, I don't like the fact that you might harm somebody else's property, or I don't believe that you'll take responsibility for the evil that well might do. You can't have it both ways. It's either you recognize that well as his and the responsibility over the effects of that well, or that well is just sitting out in the middle of nowhere and no one owns it, or we all own it equally, or something like that. So I would say that the well argument is one of property ownership. If I control the well and I am a valid property owner of this well, if I dug it myself or something like that, or I paid somebody to dig it, then I am responsible for the effects of the well, good and bad. And we've got another problem.
How is it responsible if restitution is impossible?
Why is restitution impossible?
So say he destroys my land, it's impossible to reclaim it. And if he doesn't have the funds or whatever to fix my property, so he can't be responsible for the damage if he can't restitute it.
So you didn't buy any insurance?
Right.
Okay. Well then, that might be a problem.
I'm okay with that.
That might be a problem. I would say that ultimately, when you have unforeseen
Right.
risks in life, to your health, to your property, to your car, you usually want to protect and mitigate the future risks that you don't have control over, like somebody crashing into your car, by buying insurance. So I have renter's insurance. I'm sure if you were a property owner, you would have some sort of insurance, fire insurance, that would cover unforeseen damages and evil. Is that? And then we've got another problem.
I have a real problem with this assertion that insurance is the answer to this. This is really a stretch for me. I mean, insurance didn't exist forever and ever, and insurance doesn't have infinite money either. I mean, it comes from other people, so I don't see how that's a solution to anything. I think rather that if I drill on my property and I poison other people's water and I don't have insurance, I mean, there's nothing to pressure me to do that. Absolutely nothing, especially in a voluntary society.
Right.
So I don't have insurance. I poison your well. You live next door to me. I've now damaged your property. Well, let's say it's $10 million, which is absurd, but $10 million worth of damage. I don't have $10 million. So I become personally indebted to you. And my labor and my future is now basically owned by you. And insurance isn't the answer. I mean, that seems like a really absurd way to address this issue.
Another comment?
Well, while it might be wise for us all to carry insurance on these things, and that might help us out, I don't think that it addresses whether or not, whether or not fracking is reckless. I don't think, I mean, we all see benefits of fracking, and the question isn't whether or not someone has the right to screw with their own well, it's whether or not it's reckless, whether or not we can kind of predict that it's reckless or it's not so reckless. I mean, that's where the issue's about, is whether or not we know it's reckless, and that's the argument. And if it's reckless, then we have issues where we have probable cause to say you're not allowed to do that because it's almost certainly going to affect my groundwater. So we should stop it before it begins, correct? I mean, or should we always be reactive?
I think that it'd be hard to live in a minority report society where you're condemning people before they actually do anything. So I don't think we want to go there.
So it's always just reactive.
Well, I mean, if there's a victim, then yeah, that's going to be reactive. If there's no victim, then I don't know if we want to be in a world where you are condemning somebody before they actually do anything, what they might do.
I think this ultimately comes down to a difference of opinion on whether or not your ability to exercise your ability to control property should be predicated on whether or not you can take responsibility for your control of that property.
So if I am the owner of a well on my property and I would like to mitigate against maybe future claims and maybe the evils of that well, I can transfer some of that my responsibility over my well to another party. Let's not call it an insurance firm. We can call it whatever we want, but we can transfer maybe our responsibility and the damages it might incur from that well to another party. Maybe that's another way to attack the problem. I don't know. I'm trying to.
Well, it's whether or not you should be required to be able to take responsibility for your actions before you're allowed to act in such a way where you wouldn't necessarily be able to cover your responsibility. And that seems to be the fundamental disagreement.
Right.
Well, one more thing. I'm getting the hook.
There's two assumed premises in this analogy that we need to deal with. One is that fracking necessarily causes damage, which is, of course, every situation is independent of others, so you never know. But for the most part, it's generally junk science that we're dealing with here, and we're dealing with propaganda.
Okay, let's assume that it doesn't. Okay,
Right.
good.
So
what's the second point?
The other thing is that there necessarily has to be a third party called government to moderate this situation. And that is the danger, is that if there is a situation where something I do might cause ill effects on somebody else, I would rather have that be something that can be worked out among those parties without bringing in the great referee in the sky.
I like that. You're speaking my language. Let me wrap it up. Do I have like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes? All right. Really the point of everything I'm saying to you is not to get you to agree with what the case I'm making for property rights. What I want to get across is, if you're going to be a lover and a communicator of liberty and freedom and markets and everything that's sexy on the back end, you know, globalization and bringing McDonald's to Zimbabwe, then you've got to understand that what you're saying when you say that stuff is built on a mountain of assumptions and ideas and philosophy, and you're starting at the very end of the movie where Smeagol is biting off of Frodo's finger to get the ring. You gotta rewind all the way back to the beginning of the movie and figure out what you're predicating your whole philosophy on. You don't have to agree with me. I mean, you know what? In fact, don't agree with me. Doubt everything that I'm saying and doubt everything that you already believe, and try to get down to that first step. Try to dig deeper, dig deeper, dig deeper. If you don't think that I exist is deep enough, well then go one step deeper. Let's try to go deeper and deeper and deeper until we have exhausted all possibilities, and then reevaluate some more. So that's all I'm saying. I mean, however you want to come to your foundations, that's fine. I'm not asking you to agree with what I'm saying. However, I do believe that all of the spouting off about conclusions and effects of things, it leads us down a very difficult path, because you can have all the facts and all the data and all the history in the world to prove that the effects of what you want is really good. And then somebody else can go, well, I don't believe your data. Or my data says something different. So it's a really difficult proposition if you go around talking about the end of the movie.